I've built several combat robots at this point. 2 versions of Stompbot, 2 versions of Blastwave, and Thwackintosh. However, they are all quite small, capping out at 1 pound. So for my next robot, I decided to go big, but not too big, and push towards the featherweight class of combat robots. I'm Kepler Electronics, and meet the newest addition to the fleet, Dreamphaze. Dreamphaze is designed to be a competitor for the Sportsman class, which disallows certain designs as a competitive challenge. Active weapons are required, so a purely defensive design like Stompbot would not be allowed. Kinetic spinners are also disallowed, so something like Blastwave would also be against the rules. The reason I decided to go with the Sportsman class was because I wanted to build the robot out of relatively inexpensive parts and not have to worry that it would get completely destroyed in its first match. So I went with a lifter design comprised mostly of affordable aluminum plates. I actually have 2 CAD designs for the robot, the initial ill-conceived design that I would eventually scrap, and the modern design I made mostly on stream. I designed this mostly during my economics and music theory classes my senior year of high school. It looks pretty decent at first glance, but has quite the horrible pivot mechanism for the lifter. Where the motor would turn this other bar would in theory follow, and the arms would lift. This design would have a ton of difficulty self-righting thanks to this linkage, and also would probably have trouble lifting opponents. This bot was scrapped, and I started on the second revision. Since I have streamed most of the CAD design, this video is going to be an abridged version of the process of designing Dreamphaze, just to give an idea of how I went about designing something of this scale. So let's start with the things that were pulled over from the first iteration, the motors. The drive motors in both designs are just cheapo drill motors. I already bought a lot of these like 2 years ago, so they've been sitting in my closet for the longest time. These are considered perfectly acceptable featherweight motors, albeit disposable, and I will be using 4 of them. For the lifter motor, I designed it around a P61 gearbox with a 550 motor mounted to it. So, when I decided to start streaming my CAD design sessions, the bot looked like this. A couple plates of aluminum, motors, and the forks in front. In the first stream session, I immediately went on to try and design some nut strip to allow for easier assembly, and added in some wheels from Banebots. I did move this plate from the bottom to a more central location, cutting in a hole for wire routing. I also prototyped some lids and continued onward, making some front panels before going off on an absolutely ugly cosmetic cover attempt. The fork bearing blocks were initially supposed to be held in with standoffs, a really quite horrible design that I thankfully realized immediately at the start of the second session when I replaced them with pillow bearings. The wheels were also replaced with bigger wheels to allow for some added thickness and some cosmetic top armor. It was also at this point that I had nailed down how to actuate the arms. The Banebot's P61 gearbox has a shaft replacement to allow for a 1/2-inch hex shaft, which mates perfectly with the Vex Pro Thunder Hex line of products, which would allow me to use their sprockets and chain. I didn't bother swapping out the shaft for the model, so it is a bit ugly, but I guess I have to deal with it at this point. I also put in some rough approximations of some speed controllers and a battery, but I'm still not quite sure where I'm going to do with all the electronics, so I'm not going to get into that in this video. I did start prototyping a lid design during this session, though. Let's take a detour and go over theming. Similarly to how Blastwave was intended to be synthwave themed, Dreamphaze is intended to be vaporwave themed. To massively oversimplify, if the synthwave aesthetic is a dark version of the 80s, inspired by science fiction and action movies from that time period, vaporwave is a much more chill interpretation of the 80s and 90s styles, incorporating a lot of corporate imagery, Japanese culture, Greco-Roman statues, consumerism, and the early internet. While both of them do push into cyberpunk territory at times with their imagery, vaporwave is generally a lot more relaxed about it. While designing the bot, the model's aesthetic ended up a lot closer to a general 90s theme, which explains the lid design. I've always loved the Sega Dreamcast design. I grew up with it as a child, and its massive circular disc tray with these sloped sides has really just stuck in my imagination. I also really like the original Xbox with that massive X shape on top. The top came out as sort of an amalgamation of the ideas of both, taking the clean shapes of the Dreamcast and the polygonal design of the Xbox. In case you're curious, here are a couple of sketches I made before going in and modeling the lid, just to try and nail down the look. Even with the sketching as preparation, this was a nightmare to model in Fusion 360. Now that I've learned Blender, I'd probably use that to model something like this, but since I'd already modeled it in Fusion, there's no sense in doing it twice. It does have some artifacts, but these did seem to go away during a test print, so there's even less sense in changing it now. After finishing up the lid off camera, it was time for session 3. Real Thunder Hex shafts were added rather than a circular approximation. I also adjusted the placement of the middle plate and started making some motor retention brackets. I did also add these mounting holes to the side rails before redesigning the forks to better fit the new mounting plates. I also designed some standoffs to hold the motor brackets at the sidewalls because I hadn't done that yet. That was all for session 3, so in session 4, I realized between streams that the bearing flats were much too small. So I decided to replace them with half-inch ones. I cut some holes in the lid to allow the forks to slide through for increased range and played around with some design variants before settling on this simple channel style. That did take up most of the stream, and at this point I got pulled into university classes and didn't have any more time to stream until December of 2020, which is when I came back with a face cam, so that's pretty nifty. Session 5 started by making a new motor bracket to supplement the original. This would use the same mounting holes as the initial design, gripping the double D shape of the motor's front and preventing it from twisting. I also added in some lid mounting holes and wheel hubs, the plan for which was to thread onto the drill motor shafts. I mistakenly thought that the bot was done at this point, but it was not, so a session 6 was needed. The reason was that I had forgotten to add in a power switch. As always, power switches are required to comply with the rules, and as there really isn't anything between the small and affordable Fingertech switches and the massive and costly Waiachi switches, I decided to roll with a removable link, where a power connector is used to bridge the connection. I had a bunch of Dean's connectors lying around, so I designed for that, but coming back to this a while later, my stock of Dean's seems to have disappeared. So I'll be switching over to XT60s, another more yellow connector type, which also seems to be preferred for this purpose more so than Dean's. I then decided to redo the nut strip to use the Fingertech stuff. If Blastwave's drum taught me anything, it was that drilling and tapping is incredibly difficult with the tools I have access to. So I decided to switch over to some pre-made stuff rather than my custom designed stuff. Holes were also made for the weapon motor, and with that, the stream was done. I did run across a couple issues with the motor mounts, as the motors I had ordered included an extra peg here, but that was easy to account for. I also needed to cut the lids apart, as they were much too big to fit on my already large print bed. I used this peg system with these extra angled supports to help prevent the protrusion from breaking off at the base. I did do another stream this time to add in a wedge attachment, but it's pretty boring, honestly. I imported the bot into Blender to test out some animation stuff, which culminated in another stream where we made this animation, which is not that great, honestly. No, it was not that great. But it was at this point where I felt pretty confident about where the bot was sitting, and I got ready to order all the parts. However, I was spooked by this tag here on the BaneBots page, saying that the gearbox had a limit of 60 foot-pounds. Now, the values that I had been getting, assuming 8-inch forks and a heavier than normal opponent, were above 300 foot-pounds. And at this point, my classes started to pick up again, and I had to put this project back on the back burner. Then, about 3 months later, with my classes finished up, I decided to go and figure out how much of a gear reduction I needed to safely lift an opponent. That's when I realized I forgot to convert my units. You can imagine how dumb I felt, as lifting a 45-pound opponent with our 8-inch forks only required 30 foot-pounds of torque, which was exactly half of the maximum load. So I never needed to change anything at all, and I was done, right? Wrong. I still needed to add in an LED light to make the whole thing legal, and rather than simply slapping an LED here and calling it a day, I decided to take another page out of the Dreamcast book and cut a triangular shape from the lid, which would then be filled with a small triangular piece. This would either be cut out of frosted acrylic or printed with a translucent filament to get some cool lighting effects. Aesthetics aren't the most important thing, but they are pretty important to me. However good or bad things turn out, I want to know that I at least try to build something that looks good. Nothing about the design really screams Vaporwave. That's alright, I guess, but I still did have 2 things to play with off stream. The first was color, and I wanted to try 3 things. The first design was one of the ones that I had made on stream, where we had a minty green body with pink forks and purple wheels. It's a bit nuts, but it does kind of fit the vibe. The next color scheme was this pink color scheme, or as I have dubbed it, the strawberry milkshake version. I wanted to try something with multiple shades of pink, as that reminded me of the Floral Shop album cover, but honestly, it's a bit much. I also tried a teal and pink color scheme, which is pretty self-explanatory, but honestly, I didn't really dig those colors for the Vaporwave theming. But for one more color scheme, I decided to take the minty design, remove the purple, and fine-tune the pink color a bit. I think this is the final color scheme, at least for this iteration of the bot. It's pretty Vaporwavy, and will be even more so when I jazz it up with the second thing I was talking about earlier, some nice aesthetic stickers and decals. Specifically, I want to put some cherry blossom decals on the lids. The color already matches an Arizona green tea can, and seeing as that can has somehow become one of the tenets of the Vaporwave aesthetic, I'll be using that to increase the bot's Vaporwave score even more. So since I can't draw myself, stickers. I haven't really decided on what stickers exactly, but since everything here right now is in the realm of 3D, I decided to simply add some random PNG images as decals to the top of the lid. And yeah, I think that really adds something. And with that, I think we've covered the full design of Dreamphaze. This is one of the longest running projects I've done on the channel, as I started this in my senior year of high school and I'm now in my sophomore year of college. It's been a long time coming. I've actually started to purchase a few of the parts already, as you can see just chilling in this clothes hamper here. The only thing that I'm really missing at this point is the wheels, and I also did decide to go with a different gearbox as opposed to the P61, but that happened after I wrote this video, so yeah, I'll just stay tuned for the second part where I actually build the darn thing, and you'll get to see what gearbox I actually picked. But thank you so much for making it this far. I really enjoyed streaming the whole thing, and if you want to see the streams in full, they are available on my second channel, Kepler Electronics 2. If you enjoyed the background music in the video, it's all original. When I'm not building robots, I'm often making music, and one of the things I really enjoy making is Vaporwave adjacent stuff. Not all of it can be quite classified as Vaporwave, some of it's like future jazz or whatever the heck you call it, I don't know. But it's all available for download and stream through the links in the description, so check it out if you think it might be up your alley. Either way, thanks again for watching, goodbye.